Hello there, this is James S. Crawford, year 1978, and no, Trump almost certainly isn't going to die. Even as a morbidly obese 74-year-old who lives on junk food and has a pathological hatred of exercise, his chances of survival still would have been greater than 90%, even if he weren't the President of the United States and thus had access to the best medical treatment on Earth, including antiviral drugs and experimental antibodies that most Americans could never even imagine, let alone have access to or afford. Instead, the conflicting and concerned reports all seem to revolve around the speed and extent of his recovery. Because one thing about which most people remain criminally ignorant when it comes to COVID-19 is that if you're infected with the novel coronavirus, it's not a black and white binary between either survival or death, but rather the fact that even young and healthy people who showed no symptoms whatsoever often suffer permanent damage to their heart and lungs. So will such damage or a long and arduous recovery process possibly prevent him from running in the election, because he literally never ran beforehand? With only a month to go before Election Day, the answer to that is almost certainly no as well, because neither Trump's ego, the adoration of his base, nor the spineless cowardice of those around him will allow him to concede or be removed from office, even if the permanent damage leaves him struggling to breathe while confined in a wheelchair. And in the end, though, isn't that better? American voters must send the clear, unequivocal message that will be a vote heard around the world and echo through the ages that they reject his neo-fascism and that of his supporters. And let's face it, rather than a quick, clean and relatively painless death or the opportunity to bow out gracefully, followed inevitably by flight to a country without an extradition treaty, isn't it far more satisfying to do what Michael Che did on SNL and wish him a long, slow and arduous recovery, followed by humiliating and total defeat and a long and miserable life filled with indictments, conviction, imprisonment, the final terminal bankruptcy, and becoming a total joke, irrelevance, and object of ridicule and contempt as his former supporters all turn against him, and the empire, in inverted commas, that he built upon debt and sleight of hand, completely collapsing and crumbling around his ears. Hashtag to the pain. But the bottom line, though, the reason why I'm making this video is that even if he does die or become incapacitated before the election, it will still be a monkey's paw wish, because on a practical level, absolutely nothing will change. Pence will still be president until January, unless at least 4 Republican senators drop dead or become incapacitated as well. Anti-abortion Barbie will still be confirmed to the Supreme Court, and worse, if he dies or is forced to drop out of the race, then Trump will be a martyr, the noble hero who would certainly have crushed Biden in a landslide and saved America from the Black Lives Matter, Antifa, communist, feminazi, coastal elite, and that's why the evil demon rats conspired to poison him. With this conviction fueling a wave of right-wing protests, riots, terrorist attacks and political assassinations that will make the civil unrest of the last few months look like a jamboree by comparison. And worse, Trump's martyrdom will further polarize the country and radicalize the GOP, with Republicans like Tom Cotton fighting even harder for the honor of being Trump's successor, the president who will fulfill his vision and finally make America great again. Like Wonder Woman in her eponymous movie, moderate liberals in particular, but not exclusively, appear to have become convinced that Trump is the sole architect of all of our woes. That if only he would just fucking die already, then like killing the evil emperor at the end of Return of the Jedi, then everything would return to, quote, normal, and peace and sanity would be restored. But no, Trump is merely a symptom of the deeply rooted issues that America was struggling to ignore for half a century before he ever rode down that golden escalator. Indeed, one of these days I have to get around to making a video explaining how the Confederacy's surrender at the end of the Civil War wasn't a peace, it was an armistice for 99 years until the signing of the Civil Rights Act. But in the meantime, though, the reason why the issues of racism, white supremacy, xenophobia, white supremacy, and even more racism have been allowed to consume America at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives and potentially its very democracy itself is because 10 million people who voted for Obama in 2012, and more specifically 100,000 people in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, either failed or refused to vote for Hillary for whatever reason. After all, contrary to the ocean's worth of ink and liberal tears that have been spilled on this subject since 2016, there was no great shift in the cultural zeitgeist, no massive white lash against the ignominy of a black man being elected to the highest office in the land, no doubt fraudulently, no five-dimensional chess, no genius insight on the part of Trump into the needs and the souls of the forgotten men and women of America. And while it's true that many people voted for Trump as an act of protest, that happens in every election, and literally the only reason that anyone noticed or cared was that while Trump lost the popular vote by nearly 3 million, the margin of victory in those 3 key states was less than a single %. Because when all is said and done, the 2016 election had the lowest turnout of any national election in the previous 2 decades. If Bill and Hillary hadn't been the victims of a 25-year-long propaganda campaign by neoconservatives that was the prototype for their attempts to destroy Obama, then she would have won. If America wasn't grossly and systemically misogynistic, with journalists asking if a grandmother could be president when plenty of grandfathers had been presidents in the past, then she would have won. If James Comey hadn't made the outrageous and utterly absurd decision in defiance of all logic, reason, and sanity to inform Congress that the FBI was reopening its investigation into Hillary's emails so close to the election without also mentioning that they were investigating Trump, then she would have won. And in short, if those 100,000 people had stopped whinging in those 3 key states and voted blue, then Hillary would have won. So maybe it's good that she didn't. Maybe it's good that after 4 years of chaos and destruction, your country is on the verge of collapsing into fascism, because now Democratic politicians are less arrogant and complacent, true, but far more importantly, like a child burning their finger on the hot thing that their parent repeatedly told them not to touch. Maybe now you'll fucking learn that, as Anubis2814 put it in a video linked down in the underbar, Nazis always vote, so you have to as well. Or should I say, hopefully most of you will learn that lesson, because while your country is burning, both figuratively and literally, hundreds of thousands are dead, and you're on the verge of losing your right potentially forever, including your right to vote, even now some of you are still complaining that the lifeboat isn't quite progressive enough. So in short, stop wishing for a death that isn't going to happen, and even if it did happen would only make things worse. Accept reality, understand that flipping the Senate is even more important than who controls the White House, get everyone you know to register to vote, and all of you vote blue no matter who.